All right, thank you everyone for coming on a Friday after a party. I really appreciate your time. So today we're going to talk about scaling permissions. So I know this is mainly identity, but after identity there has to be permissions. So who has played around, uses in their day-to-day with AWS? Yeah? Who has used IAM? Most likely you have to use IAM if you're going to use AWS. Okay, cool. So we'll demo that kind of at the end, but I'm talking more about the model of using attributes to scale permissions management. So this kind of applies in a lot of places. So a little bit about me. I was asked to put a slide about myself, so this is really awkward. But 5-year Amazonian. I do product management for AWS Identity. Currently focused on products that help customers set access control. So check out IAM Access Advisor if you're in the IAM console ever. And then I am an avid horse rider. You're going to hear a lot about Pickles, because he's my horse. And I use him as an example for different things when I don't have a word for something. So that's Pickles out in the field eating some grass. All right, this is what the next 40 minutes looks like. First, I'm going to do a very high-level permissions review, just so you kind of level set your mindset about how permissions work, how it's connected to identity, et cetera. Then we'll talk about ABAC, which is Attributes-Based Access Control. And then we'll talk about how you can apply ABAC in your organization. So if you're taking this model back to your organization, things to think through, and then I'll leave you with some best practices. So if you go and you're like, okay, I'm going to move towards this model, here are the things I need to check off to make sure that the model is secure, and we'll go from there. All right, permissions review. So I talk with a lot of customers. I typically talk with customers who are central security admins or developers creating permissions for applications and whatnot, and I hear, hey, like, we need to move fast. We need to innovate. We need to give developers freedom, or we need freedom as developers, right? And so that's great. But you always have this counterbalance of we need to make sure that dangerous actions aren't done. So for example, I don't know, changing networking settings, or potentially deleting users, or deleting admin users, or opening data up to grant access. And then there's also accountable for your security posture, and then there's also the cost-effective solutions, which comes in. And so these kind of have to work together to make sure that people can innovate. And so it always comes down to who can access what. Who has heard this or said this in their life? I would hope a lot, right? Like, if you're working in identity, that tends to be. So who is your workforce users, your developers, and sometimes it's even your applications. And the what, which I'll talk about today, is resources. And this can be generic resources, your databases, your instances, your servers, or in AWS, a bunch of resources. We have over 300 types of resources, Lambda functions, batch jobs, secrets and secrets manager, the whole shebang. And so that's what I'll use as my demonstration today. And what connects the two together are those permissions, right? The permissions say who can access what. And there's two parts to permissions. The first part is specification. That would be your job, a developer's job, an admin's job. And you define which entities are allowed to perform which actions on specific resources under which conditions. So that can get pretty granular. And in AWS, we actually have a very granular permission set that you can specify all those combinations. And that's how you define. The second part is our job, or your platform's job, right? And so in the case for today, it's AWS's job. It's the enforcement. So for every request that comes into AWS, we build solutions that say yes or no. There's no middle ground. You're allowed or you're not allowed. And so that's the two parts. Today we're going to talk a lot about the definition, because that's where ABAC comes into play. And then I'm going to demo a little bit about the enforcement, because that's the fun part where you get to actually see how developers can move fast and they can go build and not have to go to a central admin every single time. So if we look at where the industry has been, it's been largely an RBAC model. So this is role-based access control. And with that, you have your developers on the left. So that's your who. There's a lot of solutions to manage the who. And then your resources on the right. And what we've done is you create individual roles or permission sets. And with those roles, one could be a database administrator, network administrator, developer role for this project. And for each unique combination, you're creating a new permission set, and then you are allowing those developers to essentially use that permission set, and they get one or many. So the individual in the middle has multiple permission sets, and you can imagine how that scales. And so with the RBAC model, you grant permission sets by assigning a collection of roles, okay? That's pretty straightforward. You draw that line that was on the left-hand side. You create a new role for each unique permission set. So that's great. You add another box in the middle when you need something new. You also add permissions for each new resource. So every time a developer creates a new resource, you have to go to one of those boxes and grant that access, especially if you're tackling granular permissions. And then finally, you determine access by auditing. So this may be straightforward and pretty simple to think about, right? This is how we've been doing it for a while. It's how people have been doing it in AWS for a while. But guess what? It runs into challenges at scale, right? You have hundreds of development teams building across hundreds of accounts in AWS, and you have to go and update permission for every new resource created. That's tiring. That means that developers can't on the weekend just go create something and Monday morning the rest of their team has access. They have to go to you or to an admin and go say, hey, give me access, or submit a ticket. And that really bogs down the administrative team, it bogs down developers, and it slows down innovation. And so we've been asking ourselves for a while, what if there's something better? And honestly, in the industry, a lot of people have been talking about how do we use attributes. And attributes can help you scale because they already exist today in a lot of places. So let's introduce ABAC. So attribute-based access control. So this is the model where you use attributes to create general permission rules that scale with your organization. I'm going to level set on attributes first. So what is an attribute? An attribute can be a key. A key is simply a custom word that you apply. This could be a team name. This could be PII compliant. This could be development, right? Or it can be a key and value pair. Stage equals development. PII compliant equals true, whatever. Team equals pickles. So I have some examples here, and you can start seeing how things match but kind of don't match, right? So user ID is Ziggy, team is unicorns, project pickles. That's for the user identity. On the right is the resource. We've tagged that with project pickles, environment development created by Ziggy. So you can start seeing how they go. So we remember that RBAC model with that picture with identities, permissions, and resources. Well, ABAC looks like this. So same order, different lines. Okay, so on the left, you have your developers with attributes. A lot of these exist already in your identity provider. So you would have, project red, project blue, project green, and then you have on your right the same values, and then in the middle, it's matching. That's all it is. It becomes matching. So I could go and I could change the woman on the bottom to blue, and all of a sudden she would have access to blue. No permission update required. Today in AWS, if we look at this, these are your IAM users, your IAM roles, if you're familiar with those concepts. Those are your principals in AWS. And today these tags are your tags on your users and roles. In the future, they will be your attributes from your identity provider. So AWS will allow you to pass those attributes from your identity provider into AWS to allow for you to use those attributes for permissions in AWS. That enables your identity provider to be the source of truth, which is really where ABAC becomes powerful, right? Because you're already putting a bunch of attributes on your identities, and you're monitoring those, and you're auditing them, and you're making sure that they're accurate. Now, you'll also have attributes on your resources, and permission becomes a matching game. So what are the benefits of ABAC? The cool thing is that permissions scale with innovation, right? So a developer over the weekend can go and create a bunch of resources, and as long as somebody is tagged with project equals pickles and those resources are tagged with project equals pickles, they will get access Monday morning, Sunday night, whenever they need to. No permission update required. Teams move fast because permissions apply automatically. Like the second that that resource is created, the permission is applied because it's all based on attributes. There's no change. The other thing is pretty cool is that you get granular permissions, but you get it at scale, right? And you don't have to list out every single bucket or every single Lambda function that you need to grant access to. And then finally, if we talk about audit, you would audit the attributes, which a lot of you are already doing. One, from an identity perspective, and two, from a resource perspective, because that's how you're charged in AWS. That's how you're built. So people are already doing this audit of attributes, and so now you're doing it for access control. I'm going to read off the slide. I rarely read off the slide, but I'm going to read these sentences. I'm going to emphasize a certain word in each one. And this is to really drive my point home. So these are examples of how you can set up your general permission rules in using ABAC. So grant developers read and write access to their project resources. Require developers to assign their project to new resources. Grant developers read access to resources common to their team. Manage only the resources I own. Notice that I didn't call out Project Pickles. I didn't call out created by Ziggy. I did not call out Team Unicorns. I simply used the words that rely on the identity itself, which means that you can create general permissions, attach them all over the place, and guess what? You would have just matching. And it's all based on those attributes. All right, so you're probably thinking to yourself, okay, I get it, Brigid. I got the identity attributes, good. I got the resource attributes, good. I know that there's matching, but how do I go about doing that? And what if somebody changes an attribute and all that sort of stuff? So this is how 5 steps. Uh-oh. There's some automation that's stuck in there. Sorry about that. 5 steps to implementing ABAC. The first 3, very, very important, are set it up. This is your admin setting it up. It's a set it and forget it model. So when you think about these steps, the first 3 are rotisserie chicken, right? Always think about rotisserie chicken when you think about that. Okay, so first 3 are admin. So I'm going to play the admin as I go through the demo. Hopefully the demo will work. If not, we're watching some videos of the demo. And then the bottom 4 are the developers. And this is them moving fast. This is them innovating. And we can go play and have some fun here. So first, you're going to create your identities with access control attributes. Notice that I use the term access control attributes. We'll talk about best practices, but essentially you are going to identify certain attributes that you want to use for access control. They should not be your finance attributes, right? You should separate them out. We'll talk a little bit about that. Second is I'm going to say, hey, for every new resource created, it must have an attribute, right? You don't get to create a resource if it doesn't have an attribute. So this makes sure the permissions apply automatically. Third is I'm going to set permissions based on attributes. That means, hey, once you created the resource with an attribute, then guess what? You or other people can manage it. And then 4 and 5 is all the developers, they'll go create resources, permissions will apply, and you'll see how you can, based on different teams and different attributes, you can play around and have the access that you need. All right, so demonstration setup. I told you you're going to hear a lot about pickles today. So Team Pickles, that's going to be one team, the horse. Team Bubbles, champagne, love champagne. So there we go. Those are the 2 things I came up with randomly on the weekend. I am going to use AWS Secrets Manager as my demo service. If you haven't checked out AWS Secrets Manager, I highly recommend it. You can turn long-term credentials into short-term credentials. So if you're looking for database passwords to be able to rotate, to be able to retrieve automatically within code so people aren't writing their passwords on Post-it notes, go check it out. It's a great service to use in your application or even just for your everyday passwords that developers need, and they can look at it in the console if they need to. Rotate is the main point. Okay, so the first is I'm going to create identities with access control attributes. What I'm going to do is I'm going to only create the pickles. I have the other stuff set up. You don't need to watch me do the same thing twice. So I will create a role for Project Pickles, and I'm going to name it Cost Center 1, 2, 3, 4. I already have the role for Bubbles, which I'll show you with Cost Center 2048. How did I come up with 2048? Well, I was addicted to that game. I won the other day. I don't know if anybody else plays it, but I was really excited. So that's where we're at right now. Okay, let's try this live demo thing. One thing I do need you to know is I am the administrator in Chrome. I will be a developer in Firefox. So if you're kind of confused of what role I'm playing, know that Chrome is your admin and Firefox is your developer. All right, so this is the IAM console, and I'm going to go create a role. And it's going to be pretty simple. So I'm going to create it for another account just because I have users assuming roles so they can use short-term credentials. And then I'm actually not going to set any permissions right now because I want to show you the permissions in detail. But I'm going to add tags. What am I going to add? I'm going to add project is pickles, and cost center is 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'll give it a name, pickles, ABAC, and today's date is 6/28. I practiced this demo, so I have to make sure I have, this is for project. Oops. All right, so that's pretty straightforward. Create the role. You can see here that I have it, and the tags are there. So I've done the first step where I create my identity with some attributes. All right, pretty straightforward, right? Okay, no big deal. I guess my numbers have automation on them. All right, second is I'm going to require attributes for new resources. So I'm going to say, hey, anytime somebody uses the pickles role to create a resource, they have to specify a project tag and a cost center tag. And those values must be the values of their project tag and their cost center tag. So somebody in pickles could not create a resource with cost center 2048. Would not be possible, right? The resource wouldn't get created. And I'm going to say, hey, you can also tag with application. I didn't do the other two. You can also tag with application. I don't care what value it is. You can delete it, you can have it, you can not have it, you can change the value of it. That's just kind of your willy-nilly tags. So these are going to be more access control tags. Those are going to be more free tags for developers to use. All right, so I'm going to go through some JSON policy. Has anybody written an IAM JSON policy in our policy language? All right, I got one over here. Okay, so I will try to explain this the best I can without having to go through an entire IAM policy language session. So this is our IAM policy language. And essentially there are statements. And statements say, hey, you can allow or deny. Those are your two options up there. And this is the action. So in AWS, this is secrets manager, this is service. And this is the action, create secrets. Turns out there's over 4,000 actions in AWS. We get pretty granular with our permissions. Okay. And I say, hey, you can create any resource, all right, because the resource is not created, so I'm going to allow star there. But hey, you must, so condition, string equals, this is you must, and this must match exactly, pass in request tag, project, and that, oh wait, must be your project tag, okay? So this is the tag that I just put on the role. This is project equals pickles. You also must pass in request tag, cost center. And oh wait, it must also be your cost center. So this is the variable of your tag. All right. Also, when you pass in a tag key, remember we talked about key and value? So these are a list of keys. If you pass in, you can also pass in created by an application. You cannot pass in Identiverse, for example. That would not be accepted, right? Only these 4 are accepted because I said string equals there. Okay, so that is how I'm going to require that every new secret created has the appropriate tags that I care about. All right, let me show you. I'm essentially going to show you the policy that I've already staged, and I will attach it. So once again, in IAM console, we'll go over to policies. So policies are pretty cool in the sense that you can create it once and attach it multiple times. So I'm going to say create secrets with required tags. So this is something I've already created before. I'm going to show you edit just so I can make it big. This is the policy that I just showed you. Okay. And the only other thing I added was list secrets on everything so people can use the console appropriately. All right. And then I'm just going to go to policy usage, and I will attach it to our new role that we just created. Okay, so Pickles ABAC is starting to gain permissions. In AWS, we deny by default. So as of 2 seconds ago, the role could do nothing in AWS, absolutely nothing. Created all the identities, it had no permissions. Now it can create secrets with those attributes. Pretty cool. So I'll go over to the roles. And you can see that there, the tags are still there, etc. All right. Next, I'm going to set permissions based on attributes. So this would be the developer can now go create secrets, but once you create it, it doesn't really do you any good unless you can do something with that secret, like get the value, rotate it, put a different value, whatever you want to do. And so I'll say, hey, developers, once you create the secret, you have access to your own secret, which means you have access to secrets tagged with your project tag. So this is the policy. Once again, I'll go through it. I like being able to get really close to JSON policies. It's been really fun. Okay, so effect allow. So I'm going to allow it because remember we deny by default. So this will be adding permissions. And then this is all Secrets Manager. And here are all the management actions that you can do in Secrets Manager. My favorite being rotate. The other one would be get secret value. So that would be actually what your application would call to get the value of your database so you can connect to it. I say you can do it on all resources if this condition is met. And we've talked about this condition before, but it's slightly different in this case. And the difference is this is no longer the request tag, this is the resource tag. So the one thing that's different is request tag is the new tag you're requesting. The resource tag is the existing tag on the resource. So that the words match up, but sometimes that's hard because they both start with R. And they both have tag in it. So anyway, resource tag, so the existing tag on the resource project equals your project. So this is matching the two values. Okay. The other thing I'm going to allow is we talked about, hey, what if they change the attributes, right? That might be scary because now your attributes are based on access control. And so I'm going to say, hey, you can tag resources only on the secrets tagged with your project tag. And oh, wait, you can pass in these keys. But if you pass in project and cost center, passing in request tag, you must pass in your value. So I could not change from 1234 to 2048 to try to make that team pay for my secret, right? I can only pass in mine. But I could pass in application, and this policy says I don't care what you put in application. I could put green, blue, yellow, whatever I want. And then finally, I'm going to say you can only untag with application. You cannot untag cost center. You cannot untag project. And this is valuable because a lot of people want to make sure those cost center tags are on there because they use those for billing. But it's even more important when it comes to access control. All right, so I'm going to do the same thing, and I'm going to show you just attaching the policies. And then we'll have some fun because we get to go play developers. All right, so once again, I'm the admin here. I'll go to policies. I'll show you what I've already created, just so you don't have to watch me copy and paste JSON. Let's see if we can open this a new tab. There we go. All right, so this is the one that I just showed you, the first policy. And I'll show you JSON. Once again, list secrets, and here's all the management, but only with if your project tag equals, if the resources project tag equals your project tag. All right. And And I'm going to attach that. Who are we attaching it to? This new role we created. Awesome. Attach. And then this one is the allow you to go tag and untag the rules that I specified. So tag resource, only on yours, and you can only specify those. And if you do, you gotta make sure they're your own. And then I added the untag stuff here too. Cool. All right. So we're getting all our permissions set up, and realize that this is also only a one-time thing. Once you set it up, you don't have to change it unless you decide to use new APIs or new services. Okay. So if we go back to roles, you can see now that this should have three permissions. Did I actually attach those? There we go. 3 permissions, same as. I'm going to show you 2 roles because these are the roles that I already have logged into the console and all that fun stuff. Here we go. So I have Pickles role here. Same permissions. The only thing I added was to enable rotation, in which I allowed rotation using Lambda. Okay? So it's the only difference between the two. And I also want to show you bubbles. And what I want to show you about bubbles is the different tags. So I'm going to switch between these 2 roles to do that. Okay, because this one says 2048 bubbles. All right, so now we get to go be developers. So what I'm going to demo is essentially a developer creating new resources. We'll create secrets. And then I'll use the Pickles role to manage my own secrets. So I'll rotate an existing secret I already had. I will go look at my secret and kind of play with the tag values. And you can tell me if I'll be allowed or denied. This is a fun game I like to play. And then finally, I'll switch to bubbles, and you'll see the same thing, but from a different attribute, so different permissions. No policies here. Developers don't have to touch policies. OK. Here we go. So I'm going to be in developers. I'm in this pickle role. I'm going to store a new secret. Those are just viewing errors. Can somebody give me a word? Fun word. Come on. Oh, I love turtles. I just got back from Hawaii, and we saw sea turtles, so that was a really good one. All right. Here, I'll just do this. And I'll give it the same name. This is for Project Pickles, just so we know in our own head. All right, so I'm going to put project as turtles. And I'm going to put cost center as 1, 2, 3, 4. Will I be allowed to create this secret? No. All right, so I'm not going to enable rotation because I don't know how I would rotate turtles. Here we go. Oh man, I failed to create, those are old errors. This is the real error. I cannot create secrets. Bummer. All right, but how do I fix that? Oh, must be my attributes because all permissions are based on attributes. Let's go with pickles. Spelled correctly because otherwise it really won't work. And we'll go next. It's pretty cool. You can get sample code for your application. I created it. Cool. Because I'm pickles, I can create pickles, right? I could have done the same thing with cost center. So you'll see that I can go look at my secret. I can see the tags. I can even see the value. If I could set up rotation if I want to, all that good stuff. This is one that I've done before. This one actually has rotation set up. Once again, project equals pickles, so I should be able to rotate because I have permissions to rotate. And guess what? I was able to rotate. Right? Pretty cool. Let's go back to turtles because turtles are cool. I'm going to try to remove my cost center tag because I don't want to be charged for it. Just remove. Yes? No? No. Oh, failed. Guess I'm not allowed to do that. All right, so let's cancel out of that. But application is ocean. We'll do make sea turtles. Yes? No? Cool. Pretty simple to be able to predict, right? Based on those rules. Will I be able to do anything with bubbles? No. Couldn't touch it. Can't even see anything. I can list it. Remember, I got list secrets on everything. So what I'll do is the last thing is I'll switch over to bubbles. And remember, bubbles had the tag of bubbles. And I should be able to see this now. And I can, because it's project equals bubbles. Should I be able to see pickles? No. Can't see anything. Notice in all of that, I didn't go ask admin for an update in permission. I can do this in the middle of the night. It doesn't matter. I can do it whenever. And the permissions automatically apply in a very, very granular way. So there's the power. It scales. The other thing that you could do is you could change the tag on pickles to bubbles. And then all of a sudden, that role would have access to bubbles. And so that's another fast way if like teams need to merge or separate either one. You can have those apply. All right, let's talk about best practices. Okay, so as we think about, okay, we had RBAC and maybe we're moving to ABAC, it's not like a button that you just switch. I had a lot of people ask me about migration. You can start peeling away certain things that you want to grant access to, have the granularity, and just start with the attributes on your identities and start with attributes on your resources and just give them permission based on that, right? So it doesn't have to be a blatant switch. It'll be a progression. But what are your best practices? So this is the one I really want you to care about. Number one, that's why I put it as number one. Reserve a subset of attributes used for access control. Attributes have been around for a long time. They are not new. They are everywhere, right? And as you start thinking about using them for access control, you need to make sure that those attributes are locked down. And so I would not do not rely on your finance attributes for access control. Separate out some tags that you care about, that you know are controlled and locked down with all the rules that we went through earlier for access control. And those are the ones that you're going to be really looking, monitoring, granting access to, etc. Which goes to my next one, is once you start relying on attributes for your permissions, you need to make sure that only administrators or approved entities can change those attributes for those access control tags. So you're not going to let anybody go and change the project tag because you're using project for access control, or change the cost center tag, even though I wasn't using cost center tag for access control. So you need to be very careful. These should essentially be treated as admins in your account. So think about it. That's a change in a mental model, right? It used to be, oh, only admins can change policy. Well, now only admins can change policy and attributes, because those policies, they'll probably be changing more attributes than they are policies over time. Number 3, tag everything on creation so permissions apply immediately. If you don't tag it on creation, somebody's going to have permission to go tag it, and most likely it's going to be your admin, so you're knocking on the door anyway. So tag them on create. That's kind of the short-term tag on create. Rely on permissions to grant permission. Rely on attributes to grant permissions to manage resources. So this is that third step that I talked about. And then finally, periodically audit to ensure resources are tagged appropriately. I would say resources and identities are tagged appropriately. Most likely your identities you're already auditing those, but your resources on the other side you want to make sure to go into. All right, so before questions, I have 3 resources that are going to be helpful to you. If you're interested in learning more about permissions in AWS and how this fits into the bigger picture, this is my reInvent talk from last year, Become a Policy Master in 60 minutes or less. It talks about how you can have guardrails in AWS accounts, etc. If you're trying to work through this with AWS, know that this list is my favorite documentation page in AWS, Actions, Resources, Condition Keys. It will tell you which services have tag-based auth, which APIs to call, etc. I showed you Secrets Manager today. Well, turns out AWS has a lot of services, so you'll want to be able to go and say, like, okay, for this service, what APIs do I call? And then finally, there's a blog post that somebody actually outlined all the steps I took in a lot more detail with some more examples, and that's the blog post at the end, so you can search for that. Thank you. I am open for questions. Yes?
Sorry.
Sorry.
Era corda in inglese.
That was like...
Thank you. Earlier in your talk, you mentioned that in the future, you could pass the attributes out of AWS to your identity provider. When is that? And also,
it's the other way around. So you'll be
sorry.
able to pass attributes from your identity provider into AWS, so you can use them for attributes.
That made more sense.
Yeah. So I cannot share the date or timeline, but know that we would not share it if we were not confident. So you can kind of give a sense.
And I assume that could work on-prem and in cloud?
So the way that you access AWS is typically you federate in through SAML, and so that would be through your SAML assertion that can be passed in, right? So you can federate from anywhere into the AWS cloud. The other way that people do is just call assume role directly, and that will be supported as well, right? So if you have some sort of custom broker or custom tool that gives temporary credentials, you can do it that way as well.
So in one of your initial slides, you talked about the problem with RBAC is that you need someone to grant you the permissions and roles, and that kind of brings in a lot of overhead for the admins. But in your last slide, you also mentioned that you reserve a few attributes to be managed only by admins. So that doesn't solve that problem, right?
But that is for the attributes, because developers add them as they create new things. Most likely an admin will not have to step in. An admin will only have to step in if somebody's like, all of a sudden this production database is being managed by a different team. It needs to go from pickles to bubbles, right? So that is when an admin would have to step in to change that, because a developer wouldn't have access to.
So can't we follow the same thing with RBAC as well?
RBAC, you would, every time you even use like a new service or create a new resource, you're updating that policy.
Sure, and every team can have those policy or those role admins for the team as well, right?
Right, you would have admins for different RBAC roles, right? Like you would have an admin, and then different users can assign that way. And those admins actually create those individual permission sets. But every time that developer at the end created a new secret, they would have to call on that admin to add that resource to the permission set, right? Before anybody got access. Whereas in the demo I did, is because it was tagged and you had these general permission rules, then people could come in and touch the resource without somebody having to go and change that box in the middle.
All right, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yep.
Can you wait for a second?
Oh, sorry. I'm like so
no
eager.
issues. I'm here exactly for reminding you.
With the rule that, one of the best practices that you must tag all your resources. In a lot of cases, if a company's been around for a few years, we already have billions of resources that don't have tags, right?
Yeah.
So can you talk about maybe, are there any kind of implicit tags that resources sort of have that can be used in these attribute-based policies?
There are not implicit tags. I'd love to talk more about how you would want to see that come to life. Because typically ABAC rules are going to be based on some custom logic that you want, but I'm sure that you would want essentially, if I tag this larger thing, or everything in the account has a certain tag, etc.
By region,
or by region, yep. Or if it matched a certain name, that there were rules. Okay, yeah, that's really good feedback. Wait, you have to wait. I've learned.
Here.
It's the biggest laugh I got all day, man.
Would it be a correct takeaway to assume that with this ABAC feature, I could have lesser roles and policies?
Yep.
Like say I could have one app admin role and change the tags to specify the different app
You could
teams.
imagine a world where you have, let's just say, a developer role or one role, and it has a lot of permission sets based on what, and then those permission sets are only active based on the attributes that come in, right? And that, so once you can pass in those attributes, that will be possible, which will shrink your number of roles, right? And yeah.
Okay, and policies too, right?
And policies, yeah. And the model that's, a lot of people are, hey, we're going with least privilege on day one. That's hard to do because you don't know what people have access to, right? And so what we're really encouraging in use of AWS is, hey, go set up guardrails. Like, deny the things you don't want to happen, right? Changing networking settings, deleting that admin role, etc., turning off CloudTrail. Like, go turn those on. That's like day one, right? And then allow these more general permissions of here are the services I approve, like Secrets Manager and Dynamo and Lambda and all those, with some ABAC general rules. And then finally, you can use Access Advisor to scope down permissions over time. And that gives you the data based on what you've used, right? So you can say, oh, you haven't used directory service in this account because we set it up somewhere else, then you could deny that access.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes. Over here.
Thank you.
Run faster. I don't even know you, and I'm just like.
That's okay. We know from all everybody's emails.
Yes.
So we're implementing ABAC through actually a solution,
Cool.
Plain ID.
Okay.
And I'm just curious because we're still implementing on a on-prem homegrown system that's being developed. Do you have any experience yet, or can you share anything about the integratability of a P2P technology with your policy engine?
I haven't thought too much about that, but we should have a conversation of how that would work. But I think if I kind of think on the fly is, hey, if you're setting those attributes, right, like, and you start, let's say you start migrating workloads to cloud, as long as those things are tagged the same, it's going to be pretty easy to port over. You will still have to create the policy language because that's specific to IAM, but, and that's actually the beauty of it, right, is like once you've kind of organized your resources, if you already have it on-prem, if you're making a move to the cloud or even partial, you just kind of have to make sure those attributes stay the same, and then it could be a lot easier. But we should talk. I'd love to talk with you more about that. Uh-oh.
Of course, we have to sign.
It was really cool to see the power of IAM policy.
Yeah.
Are you aware of any efforts to extract IAM policy into an open standard?
I am not.
Okay.
So the granularity of permissions that I see in your demo is based on the profile. Is there a way to have more granular permissions? So if I'm acting as a Bubbles admin and I have permission to 10 resources and I only want to make a credential which can access only one of those, is that possible?
It is possible, and there's a couple different ways you could do it, right? So if you're granting permissions based on attributes, right, those attributes are pretty, they're going to be there, right, every single time.
Exactly, you have kind
right?
of decoupled that from the resources.
And so there's a couple models I've seen. Some customers build what we would call like a custom broker. So before you assume a role into AWS, your attributes would change based on your intent.
You filter the attributes.
Yep. So that's one. The other one would be you can also pass in, when you assume a role, you can pass in a policy with that actually scopes down your access for that session. And we've seen people rely on that to basically say, okay, I know I just got a ticket about this bucket. I'm only going to be able to see this bucket. And they scope that down. But what you're really asking for is some sort of dynamic permission model based on intent. Right. And that's where some business logic would have to happen before you go into AWS to pass in the right things.
Exactly.
Now, I will say ABAC makes that a lot easier. And the reason it makes it a lot easier because without it, you would essentially have to write a policy and add that, like do all the steps I did in 1, 2, and 3 before that person could go address that ticket. And so, whereas ABAC, you could have some more granular permissions and just pass in different attributes for each one.
Yeah.
Good thinking there.
Thank you.
Oh, good. That was easy.
Yeah, that's really easy. Do you have any plans, does AWS have plans to allow custom resources, not just protecting AWS resources, but our own resources?
Yeah, let's talk more about that. I'm curious what you mean by custom resources, because there's a lot of things in AWS like API gateway, Lambda functions, etc., that allows you to put a lot of custom code, but they still have an ARN in AWS, and so that is something would love to talk to you about. Yeah.
Awesome. Then another question around dynamic attributes. So some of our some of our attribute-based access control, we leverage things like location or other things for the attributes. So in the examples, it was all tagged attributes that look pretty static. So do you know how to deal with dynamic attributes?
So that is where the power of kind of the future item I talked about, where you can pass in attributes to AWS, how those attributes come to life before you pass them in, those could be completely dynamic, right? So if they can come from your identity provider and your identity provider has location or manager or whatever, you can use those. Or we've already talked with some customers who are like, okay, I'm going to build a lot of business logic there first and grab attributes from a DynamoDB table. Like, has this person taken a certain training that they need to access certain data and like all that sort of stuff. So that's where, and maybe we'd have to think about a more managed way to do that, but in the beginning, that will be the way that customers can do that on their own.
And then if they changed frequently also, would that be
so sessions could be up to 12 hours. Like when you assume a role, you can set it to be either 12 hours or really short, like an hour or less, I think. I forgot the actual. But you get my point is, so the attributes would not change on the fly within the session. They will stay the same. But you could make your sessions expire pretty quickly, and so that they would have to re-authenticate into AWS if you think that they change that frequently.
Anyone else? All right.
Awesome. Thank you all for coming.